Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Coffee and Something Stronger. My name is Cody Norrid, the Executive Director for Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. Coffee and Something Stronger is a coffee chat style interview show where we talk with faith leaders, environmental justice practitioners, and academics at the intersection of faith, climate change, and environmental justice. We're also in the midst of a special series for all of December. We're interviewing staffers and other people connected with GIPL as a means for you to get to know the staff better, to get to know our work better, and as an extension of our end-of-year giving campaign. So after Giving Tuesday, we were able to raise about $15,000 of our $25,000 year-end goal. So please, if you can, click on the link in the description and donate to support the work of the people that you're seeing on this show. So thank you for that. This morning, we have Hermina Glass-Hill, who is GIPL's new Coastal Engagement Associate. I'm incredibly excited for this interview and very excited to have you on the team. Hermina, thank you for joining us this morning.
I'm happy to be here this morning.
So why don't we start with you telling everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got into the work that you're doing now, briefly, and then we'll dive into it a little bit deeper later.
Well, actually, as a person of faith, environmental work has always been a part of my life in terms of honoring creation, the creation story, and embracing that all life forms are sacred. I grew up in the Christian church, and we especially celebrated nature in a way as we were Sabbath keepers, meaning at sunset on Friday, we immediately would go into this nature mode of disengaging with the world and engaging with God in a very naturalistic kind of way. But it was through education that I really got deeply involved in this work and in graduate school, undergrad as well. I was working with a nonprofit organization in Atlanta in the gun club community on an environmental racism project. I know today we're much more hopeful than we were back then because we use environmental justice these days. But it was an environmental racism project in which I interviewed community folks on the impact of pollution in their community. The gun club landfill there was a lot of runoff in the community, and I just was appalled that you had these Black folks who lived just at the fence line of these landfills, who were being impacted in terms of their health, in terms of their psyche, in terms of their human dignity. And then later on, after graduate school, I was employed with Kennesaw State University, running the Center for the Study of the Civil War era. And after studying slavery year after year, there was this light bulb that went off in my head that environmentalism and slavery are interconnected in these very deep ways. And that was 11 years ago. And since that time, I've been engaged in various environmental projects and initiatives.
Thank you for that. Thank you for this morning and for joining the team. I think that you are also in the process of writing a book right now, which is very exciting. Yeah. And I think that you're going to offer a bit of a reading from that book today.
Yes, I will. I'll read a few paragraphs of the first chapter. Great. And the book is titled Justice, Sweet Land of Liberty, The Life and Times of Susie King Taylor. But chapter 1 is called Offsprings Follow the Belly. And the chapter title is followed by an African proverb. You cannot name a child that is not born. Waiting in utter anticipation at her arrival that first week of August in 1848 were her mother, Hagar, and her grandmother, Dolly. Somehow word had reached Raymond that his wife, Hagar, was long past time for expecting a child. Her water had broken, and she had been in that way for many hours now. The fact of the matter is everyone in the quarters at the Gress plantation was overjoyed at the birth of Hagar's first child, who would finally live past the first year. They were also excited for old Mother Dolly. She, along with old Toby, was one of Valentine Gress' most trusted slaves. She had no grandchildren of her own bloodline, but with Hagar's water breaking, her dream of becoming a grandmother was coming to fruition. Dolly's anticipation was both happy and nervous if those two emotions could possibly occur simultaneously. With her precious son James dead for years now, and Hagar being her only living child, she worried. Although the mistress of the manor, Frederica, most likely lessened Hagar's domestic responsibilities as her personal house servant, the weather was no respecter of the expectant mother. The month of August was extremely hot in Liberty County's low country. The scorching temperatures frequently surpassed 90 degrees, warming the marshes and swampy lowlands, thereby aiding in what seemed like a vicious ecological cycle of life. The breeding of dormant insects like mosquitoes, dragonflies, and the double-headed love bug. The steam that rose off Massa Gress rice swamp fields on Isle of Wight could cook a whole wild boar if it were standing still. It seemed that Hagar's only relief from the heat was that of her own rhythmic panting, which cooled her sweat-glazed body. As she lay in the birthing position with her legs pinned back in discomfort on the moss-stuffed bedding, all manner of thoughts drifted in and out of her head. She too was nervous about this moment and the future of her child, who was now beginning to miraculously disengage its nourishing maternal host for an unpredictable reality. She had either miscarried or birthed stillborn children many times before. So old Mother Dolly's concerns about Hagar Ann's ability to deliver a healthy baby were valid. I'll skip over to another part. Imagine the wonderings that Dolly may have often been plagued with regarding her progeny, how her Africanness would be retained in the family lineage as the system of plantocracy and African slave ownership sought to shred any semblance of their own moral consciousness as to the sanctity of the African family unit. In the American colonies, that system instituted partus sequitur ventrum, a North American British legal term which meant the slave status of a child followed that of his or her mother. This was not completely irreverent or sacrilegious to this third generation enslaved African American woman, for she was most likely privy to a consciousness and tradition that could not be defiled by the stench of ghost traffickers of human flesh, African flesh. Across the waters in West Africa, she was probably the descendant of a matrilineal society in which descent is traced through the mothers rather than the fathers, and the dwelling place of a family unit was matrilocal, meaning the family unit resided near the mother's family rather than the father's side. So what did the ghosts know? However, it was something special about Hagar's fourth pregnancy that had Dolly all excited with joy. And from the way that Hagar had been carrying her current pregnancy, she was certain of the child's gender. With her belly sitting all high, she knew that it was going to be a girl. Seeing as Hagar had lost 3 children, Mother Dolly called on the old slave women who lived in the slave quarters around the Gress plantation. That would include the eldest slaves from Reverend Jones's place, as well as Captain Cyrus Mallard's place. She called on these seasoned, unordained prelates, priestesses, healers, and medicine women to facilitate the Christian traditions they had learned at Midway Congregational Church, not far from Jones Creek, and melded them into the memories they carried with them on the inside. Dolly also knew that these women were familiar with the old African ways, so she asked this group of elder female slaves to gather in a circle around Hagar's cabin and perform the rituals to invoke the spirit of protection and easy passage from the water world to the air-breathing world. The door to Hagar's cabin was already painted blue to ward off evil spirits. Following the well-worn paths that joined and led to the grass plantation slave quarters where Hagar lived, these women gathered on one accord for the mission at hand, ensuring that this particular offspring traveled a safe journey from Hagar's belly. This African Memorite sorority, entering through the paint blue entryway of the small, humble abode, they began their midwifery with old Dolly's African sorority. They sang, "Kumbaya, my Lord, Kumbaya." As they tarried in song, they moved about Hagar's bed with ancient birthing knowledge passed down centuries ago in West Africa. In the Yoruba tribe of West Africa, a childbirth ritual involved placing the expectant mother in a squatting position using a stool. The mother's contact with the earth, as is in the squatting position, symbolized a religious connotation which indicated the fecundity of the earth. The placenta is buried, and the umbilical cord is thought to restore fertility and help heal her womb. In Ghana, an infertile woman urinates on the ground with the placenta where it is buried in the belief that her fertility will be destroyed. When the time came, Hagar was instructed to push Hagar, push. Dolly, her daughter's legs eagle spread apart, coaxed her daughter to breathe and bear down on her diaphragm and to push and to push. And on that day, Susanna Baker was born, AKA Susie King Taylor.
Thank you for offering that reading, Hermina. And why for you this morning was that important to offer up, and what does that kind of passage mean to you?
This passage is very deeply connected to the work that I do, because here in this narrative, it centers the women, the stories, the experiences, the life experiences of Black women as the center, even in the midst of slavery. They're in the slave quarters, and the center is, it's my story. I am here, it's going to be told, and we're going to tell it. And eco-womanism centers around that, and in this way of how do we tell the stories of Black women? How do we hear the voices of the earth and hear the voices of Black women, hear the histories of Black women? And nature has always been a part of that. It's how we have chosen to listen to these stories, how we have chosen to be witnesses to these stories. And nature has always been a witness, whether it has been the trees or the earth itself, as in the story of the Yoruba women and the earth catching all of her woman's fluids and returning back to this life cycle. So when we really pause to think about our experiences, in particular as Black women, nature has always been a part of that. And as a creation care steward, this is very important in adding these kinds of stories to these greater narratives that we hear often in the environmental movement. And so this adds really this rich robustness to the movement that's um, that has been needed for quite some time.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit more? We talked a bit before this call about how you relate to eco-womanism generally, and obviously how that makes its way into your work. It's really important. And then as a educational moment for people who might be viewing and who don't know what eco-womanism is, could you give a brief description of that?
Yes, Dr. Melanie Harris is the author of Eco-Womanism. She's a college professor, a womanist proponent, as well as a pastor and a theologian, in my opinion. This idea of eco-womanism, let's back up to womanism itself, is a way of seeing and perceiving and understanding the world in terms of the lenses in which Black women and women of color have experienced the world, have experienced the world in terms of as an offshoot or as an expansion of feminism. And womanism builds into this space the idea of unity and grace and hope, that we can come together as women. We can come together as human beings and honor this earth that we have been made stewards of in this really wonderful way. And as I stated, it's a way to allow the voices of Black women and women of color to be heard in this space.
Oh, that's great. And can you talk a little bit about how eco-womanism has threaded through your work and perhaps some of the recent work that you've done that weaves into this? I know we talked a little bit about that earlier this week.
Sure. Last week we had the wonderful opportunity to partner with Well Week, which is organized by Paulita, my good friend, Paulita Bennett Martin, who works with Oceana, and other individuals in Savannah. As a sponsor, the Susie King Taylor Women's Institute and Ecology Center was a sponsor of the Well Whisperer, or Well Whispering with Michaela Harris. And this is an incredibly gifted, intuitive, spiritual woman who, African-American woman, who has traveled to Brazil and studied in Brazil and worked in Brazil as a vocalist, as a spiritual worker. And her gift of singing is what she has used to connect with the water in these really deep kinds of ways. She began singing with the humpback whales, and the whales were responding through this deep vibration through the water, were responding to songs. Her songs are lamentations. Her songs are invocations. Her songs are songs of forgiveness and songs of hope for our experiences as a species, as a human species, but also hope for the whales, the humpback whales. And this past week, Well Week is an opportunity to bring awareness and attention to the plight of the North Atlantic right whales, which actually migrate here every winter to give birth and calve, and off the coast of Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida. And so this is like holy ground. The waters are like holy ground for giving birth to this Leviathan of the deep, which is so huge and graceful and majestic, but they are threatened because of our behavior. And in our participation in Well Week, we co-created the Black Women's Coastal Memory and Conservation Jamboree, in which we joined in the Well Week programs, and we migrated in the direction of the whales. So we went southward as they were coming south. We went to Brunswick and headed to Jekyll Island for a beach sweep, as well as to honor the whales. But on our way there, in our planning, we recognized that in our honoring the whale mothers, we must recognize and honor all mothers whose children, whose sons, whose daughters, very lives have been threatened, taken, massacred. And so on our way to Jekyll, we stopped at Satilla Shores in the exact location where Ahmaud Arbery was massacred, became a martyr, and we honored him and his mother. It was a very sacred moment. We poured libations for him and his family and his spirit. And afterwards, we went on to Jekyll Island, and we poured libations for the work that we were embarking on. And we paid homage to the Middle Passage. We paid homage to our ancestors. We paid homage to Susie King Taylor. We paid homage to Maveen Besh, the beach lady, for whom Right Well 1511 was named. And somehow in 2012, Maveen, well number 1511, got injured by a boat and died between 2012 and 2014. So we paid homage to that well. And then we got on a boat and we went out into the Atlantic Ocean, and Michaela Harrison led a group of 9 Black women into this work of honoring the water, honoring the North Atlantic right whales, reciting affirmations about our kinship to the whales, because we are one of the created species. You know, we have been given the task of being good stewards to the earth and to marine life and to all life. And we are but one of the species. And so we were out there on the water blessing the whales. And it was a moment that I will never forget.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that experience. Incredibly powerful and important, these intersections between motherhood, what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a Black woman, how race intersects with that, how justice intersects with that, the importance of the water, all of that stuff. Yeah, thank you for making those connections and for sharing that. You've mentioned a couple of times, obviously, Susie King Taylor, and your book is about that work. And one of the things that you've been focused on for quite some time is the Susie King Taylor Women's Institute and Ecology Center. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that came to be and what that center is really about and how it intersects with this work as well.
Right, sure. When working at Kennesaw State University at the Civil War Center, I myself was enlightened in terms of the agency of Black people in their own liberation during the Civil War. I had thought about it, but not in a deep way, that possibly people have escaped from plantations and joined the Union Army. But then in my scholarly research at the Civil War Center, I began to research the United States colored troops. And these were regiments of African-American men who joined the Union Army. And in reading about the coastal Southeast and Sherman's Special Field Order and the 40 Acres and a Mule, I stumbled upon a story about a Black woman who had escaped. And I was fascinated. And that was in 2009. And that woman was none other than Susie King Taylor, who was a contemporary of Harriet Tubman. They met in South Carolina at one of the Union hospitals. Susie King Taylor was 13 years old when she escaped. She had attended secret schools in Savannah, and therefore, for about 6 or 7 years, she had received an education. She could read, she could write, she knew maps, she knew various subjects. And when the perfect opportunity came during the war, she and various members of her family escaped in the dead of night by boat, traveled down a river into the St. Catherine Sound, where she was rescued by the United States Navy. And she went to St. Simon's and started a school, because she might have thought that she and her family were the only ones escaping. But by the time she reached St. Simon's Island, it was a refugee camp. It was a refugee camp of Black men, women, and children by the hundreds at St. Simon's Island. And for that story, it became the focus of my life. And I'll tell you a really brief story, is that in 2017, I was I had traveled all over the country telling her story, the Carter Center, Los Angeles, Chicago. And I had reached out to someone here in Liberty County and inquired whether they would be interested in hearing this story. She's from Liberty County. Well, I came down, I was asked to speak at 3 locations in one day. Afterwards, my husband and I actually went to the small Isle of Wight where she was born. And I didn't know what to expect. When I got to a small creek on the Isle of Wight, I had this spiritual epiphany. The Holy Spirit just whirled around me and just whispered, "You are home. This is where you're supposed to be." My husband was not enthusiastic about that at all. However, when we got in our car to leave, I told him, I said, "We have to move here." And we moved here 3 months later. And the rest is history as to how the Institute came about. I saw in reading and studying the Gullah Geechee culture, of which Susie King Taylor was a member of. These were African communities along the coast, and I posit her within this exact geographical, ecological space in which she lived her life as a young girl, a young child. And from there, coming from Atlanta, where there's hardscapes everywhere, I just was amazed at the flora, the fauna, the ocean, the animals, the birds. And I started going to all of these nature preserves, and I just, there's something about this that fits. And here we are.
Oh, that's great. Can you talk a little bit, kind of going on that, about how your religious tradition and religious heritage has kind of brought you and intersects with the work that you do with the environment?
Yes. And being appreciative of life, being appreciative of air and water and land, I have made it a point to make that a part of my own altar and my own sense of praise, worship, and love for God. And as a Presbyterian, attending the oldest Presbyterian church in this county, which is now 150 years old. Our church is 153 years old now. It became part of what I would share with the church, what I would share with students in my readings that I traveled to elementary schools to read my children's book on Susie King Taylor. And when the opportunity availed itself in terms of the Savannah Presbytery, there was an opening for something that I just think was magical, an opportunity to link my personal and spiritual beliefs and religious beliefs about the natural world with a fund, with a program of the Savannah Presbytery, which is the MK Pentecost Ecology Fund, which funds nature-based programs, conservation projects for churches who want to become green, college students who have a special focus on the Southeast, particularly Georgia and South Carolina, as well as nonprofit organizations that are that range from projects to sea turtle conservation, to dolphins, to plants. And it just has worked so nicely and so well. And it has even segued into the activism work, because recently, for those of you who are in Facebook land and have heard about HB 906, saving Butler Island ties in integrally to this work. I know Beth is going to have her workshop later on this week about sacred activism, but it is a part of sacred activism when you can impart your faith and your action towards environmental justice. The Butler Island Plantation House / Houston House was the low-hanging fruit for the Department of Natural Resources to parse out to private ownership. These natural heritage preserves are donated or given to the state in honor of that they would save and preserve these spaces in perpetuity. And to have this natural heritage preserve and this 15-acre parcel containing the history, the heritage, the culture of Black people, Gullah Geechee people, whose ancestors were sold in what is known as the greatest slave sale in the history of the United States of America. And that was the Weeping Time, in which 436 individuals, human beings of African descent, were marched from Butler Island to Savannah and sold on the auction block. And the land of Butler Island is critically important to telling this story and preserving this story. If it's parsed off, who can tell the story? The land holds the memory, as Dr. Harris says, there are eco memories, there are human memories tied to this place, and it is a sacred place. And the activism around saving Butler Island, as well as other heritage preserves throughout the state, we garnered enough support from concerned citizens across the state of Georgia, Black, white, and everybody else in between, all across the nation. And our elected officials heard from us. And you know, the intersection of COVID-19, our activism, that bill did not pass, needless to say. And it's that kind of work in which we are positing ourselves in this space for land justice. The Gullah Geechee people, particularly in from Jacksonville, North Carolina, through South Carolina, Georgia, and Jacksonville, Florida, 30 miles inward is the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Area, which is a national heritage area. And in preserving and conserving the history and the culture and the land, it was very important. And another thing I'd like to add is that conservationists have this idea that, you know, you're saving everything outside of yourself. You're saving the land, you're saving the birds. But what about the human conservation? What about this intersection of the environment with animals, marine life, and human life? And that's very important.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up too, because it speaks to the restorative work that you save yourself by being about the work of good stewardship and conservation for the land and for people. Um, we don't often
Absolutely.
make that connection. So
Absolutely.
we're getting towards the end of our time here, and I wanted to ask. I've got two more questions that I'm going to try to squeeze in,
Okay.
and kind of shifting our direction to the work that is about us. Now that we as Gipple have extended ourselves to the coast over a couple of years and now have a permanent person there, that is you. Thank you for doing that. What do you see as some of the greatest threats and opportunities for communities on the coast? And what do you, as you're looking forward to that work, what is that for you?
Some of the greatest threats here on the coast is obvious. Sea level rise, excuse me, climate change and sea level rise. Um, if there is a surge of 4 inches or more, many communities up and down the coast will be, washed away, will be impacted in the worst kind of ways. And the most vulnerable of those communities, the vulnerable population in those communities, which, by the way, climate change doesn't know a color. Climate change does not, uh, uh, um, uh, sea level rise doesn't know a color. But the systemic issues that have already existed within our society are the real impact, and they are already the crises which we have not addressed. However, these vulnerable communities will be the people who will need the most help. In Matthews, Jesus says, "A new commandment I give you, that you love the Lord God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength. But the second one is like unto it, that you love your neighbor as you love yourself." And so the vulnerable communities, those vulnerable people among us who tend to be people of color, who tend to be the elderly, we have work to do. We cannot allow them to be, we can't allow them to be decimated or become migrants in their own country because the policies in terms of mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency doesn't apply to them. So municipalities, organizations like Gipple are providing what is critical in ensuring that they are equipped with the knowledge that they need to make wise choices about their lives, about their health. Climate change is about the climate and the warming of the planet, but it's also a public health issue. And so there are many people up and down the coast who need to be informed, and particularly Black Gullah Geechee communities are those communities that need this information in the most critical and dire way. And so I'm elated to be a part of Gipple's team of informing and providing education and awareness about climate change, the impact of climate change in communities of faith. How can you reduce your carbon footprint and be a part of the solution? I think that people will heal well when they feel well about knowing that they can be a part of the solution to climate change. So
Yeah.
I'm extremely excited about working with Gipple and the work that Gipple has already begun along the coast.
Yeah, the work is in front of us. It is upon us. There's a lot to do.
Yes.
So this is the last question that I'll ask you, and this is the question that we finished off all of our interviews with so far, which is, what are you missing the most about your life in this COVID-19 world? What are you missing the most? And what is giving you hope to keep doing the work that you're doing?
What I miss the most is being able to connect with people in the most authentic way. There's something about being in the space of another human being who's breathing there's something about being able to look into the eyes of another human being. Uh, Technology is fun, but I mean really having this interaction, this human interaction where, you know, they're exhaling and you're exhaling and you're in the same space because we're in this together, and we are in this together. And that's where the hope comes in, is that we're going to make it through COVID-19 with educational awareness, wearing your masks. Uh, and the second part of your question was?
What's the hope that keeps you doing the work? Which you,
That
right.
the hope is that a better day is coming. I think that as GIPL and other organizations sound the clarion alarm that we have to do something to mitigate what is already upon us, that there is hope. And we see some vestiges of hope with individuals who are avid with policy change, who are avid in communities sounding that alarm. And I think that the world is watching. With, you know, the country being able to be a part of the Paris Agreement, and very soon, that's a positive sign. So we just have to hold on to hope. There's a old Negro song, keep your hand on the plow and hold on. Let's keep our hands on the plow and hold on.
Hermina, thank you so much for giving us some time today and for talking with me and the GIPL community. Thanks everybody for tuning in for this episode of Coffee and Something Stronger. Hermina's the real deal. This is a great person that's joined GIPL staff, so please reach out to her if you're on the coast. If you're not on the coast, you can still reach out to her at hermina@gipl.org, and please consider supporting the work that Hermina is about, the work that we are about here at GIPL, by clicking on that donate button, making a gift to our end of year campaign. Thank you everybody again. You can catch us at the same time, the same place next week, Tuesday at 10 for our next episode of Coffee and Something Stronger. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Cody.
Bye-bye.